So Matt Taibbi had an interview recently, and this was with RJ Esco. So he has this show called The 0 Hour. And there was something he talked about in this interview in reference to what the media is saying to you about Joe Biden without actually saying it to you. So pay attention to this. I think this was a really good discussion. I'm just going to fast forward here, right about here. Here we go.
Proud of the building.
Did you really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so tell us a little bit about the piece of the New Criminology and what caused you to draw this parallel.
So first of all, the Chandler's course sounds great. That's I wish I could have taken that. I actually years ago was.
Oh, we're going to fast forward a little bit here.
We're always told in school, right? The purpose of the press is to inform the electorate so that they can make knowledgeable decisions about who to vote for president. The logical time to tell the people about any questions about Joe Biden's or anybody's cognitive abilities would be during the election. The fact that we were not only not told, we were actually told that we were bad human beings for having any question about it. You quote a couple, I think Sullenberger, Captain Sullenberger, you mentioned a piece of his, I'd forgotten about it till I read your piece about, yeah, I stutter too, I dare you to, it's kind of like you're a piece of crap if you even bring up Joe Biden's stutter. You're the kid, you're the schoolyard bully making fun of the stuttering kid if you question it, when in fact, people who question Joe Biden's cognition, as I did, were not doing so. I didn't question Joe Biden's cognition in 2008. I saw him occasionally stutter, but I actually thought he was a smart in terms of, he was fast with a one-liner. His one-liner about Rudy Giuliani, his favorite noun, a verb, and 9/11,
Right.
A good line, he could deliver a line. I didn't have those problems back then, so I wasn't making fun of a lifelong stutter. I had concerns in 2018. Those were not, 2020. Those were not, stuttering concerns. That was something else. So, but this idea that not only now he doesn't have a problem, we're not going to report on the non-problem. And if you bring it up as if it is a problem, you're ableist and a bad person.
Let's talk about that for a second. Now, I see some questions in the chat about who this is. So this is RJ Esco. I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. He actually, excuse me, another hiccup. 1 second. Okay. He actually worked with Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2016, if I remember correctly. But RJ, he brings on a lot of people for like these interviews. The point that he's making here in reference to Joe Biden's cognition, this is an important piece because even during the debates, the Democratic primary debates, Joe Biden was having difficulty then. And we pointed it out. I mean, people noticed that this was an issue. However, mainstream media made you feel bad for pointing that out. How dare you point out the fact that Joe Biden seems to be having some type of cognitive decline, that Joe Biden is not answering the debate questions that are being, asked of him. He's just stuttering out, or not stuttering out, but he's blurting out words that really didn't even answer the question. Like that time when he talked about some guy named Corn Pop, or that time when he talked about that kids need to just sit next to the radio and listen to the record player. That had nothing to do with the question that was asked. However, mainstream media framed it in such a way that if you did question Joe Biden's cognition or cognitive, I'm sorry, guys, I'm all over the place tonight because of the Wi-Fi. If you question Joe Biden's cognitive decline, then that meant that you were a bad person. That meant that you were being ageist. Now I'm going to call out the hypocrisy part, because that same mainstream media had no problem calling out Bernie Sanders' health issues. It wasn't considered ageist when they called out Bernie Sanders' health problems. When they pointed to the fact that, oh, well, Bernie Sanders he's too old. Joe Biden and him were pretty much near the same age. When Bernie Sanders, when he had the heart attack, remember, they said this would be a problem. How is he going to be president of the United States? He's not in good health. Remember that? Bernie's poll numbers actually increased after he had that heart attack. So that scared the media even more. So why was it okay to criticize the health of one politician, but it wasn't okay to criticize the health of another politician? Both of them older men. Because the media had already decided that they wanted Joe Biden to be president of the United States. They had already decided that. And I'm really surprised that more people did not see this hypocrisy when it was actually taking place. I'm like, nobody notices that CNN and MSNBC are saying very negative things about Bernie Sanders' age and his health. But if you say that about Joe Biden, they point fingers at you and say that that's ageist. That's the point that RJ is pointing out. So you have to pay attention to what the media says, reading between the lines. And that's what this discussion is about, reading between the lines. Not necessarily what they're saying with their mouth, although you should pay attention to that too, but what they're really not saying. Let's go back in.
Is really groupthink, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really creepy, and as you say, it's kind of alien to the news mission. Theoretically, we don't care, whether or not he has what the political import of him, possibly having a cognition issue would be. I think what happened during the campaign, and I know this because I talked to some of the people who were covering him. I followed him for a little while. A lot of us saw him in 2008. We saw the clear difference. As you say, he was quick. He always seemed prescient, although he did sometimes have trouble speaking. Sometimes he would kind of accelerate unnecessarily, or his emotional tenor would be sometimes not match the speech. Like the register would be angry when it was supposed to be inspiring. It would be off somehow. But in 2020, it was a completely different issue. It clearly had to do with things like not being aware where he was, being unable to control impulses like anger with people, forgetting where he was in the middle of a sentence.
Those things happen often during the debate when he was running. And so they started to scale back his press appearances. Did everybody notice that? You didn't see him doing as many interviews after people started pointing that out, that there's something a little bit off here with Joe? They were trying to hide him, but they wanted him to be president. And now some of those same people, now they're like, oh God, Joe Biden is making mistakes during these press conferences. Maybe we might need to replace Joe. He was making mistakes like that when he was running for president, but they still wanted to push him through.
It wasn't a speech issue, although I'm sure that complicated it, right? But I think what a lot of the reporters are saying to each other was, well, if we talk about this, then it's going to hurt his chances against Trump. And part of our mission now is to make sure that Trump doesn't win. So let's sit on this. But what ended up happening, I think that ends up becoming a problem of credibility for the newspaper, which makes it more difficult to report on things and have an impact on the public overall.
That's right.
And I also think it's a dereliction of responsibility. And, just to be clear, in terms of my own, conflict of interest, although it's overstating the case, I worked for Bernie Sanders in 2015, 2016. When issues of his age came up, I gave him a line to use, which he did use, which was, if you have any concerns about my age, questions about my age, come out with me for a day on the campaign trail and see if you can keep up. And I gave him.
And I don't know if anyone has given that advice to Joe Biden in reference to questions about his age coming up. I don't know. Maybe they have, and he's just not listening to them. Don't know. I don't know who's advising Joe before he does these interviews, before he does the press conferences. I don't know. Maybe he just doesn't want to listen. But you heard what RJ just said, the advice that he gave to Bernie Sanders when those questions come up.
In that line, which he used, because I found it hard
true.
to pick up. Yeah, man. Yeah, it definitely was. On the other hand, so, I didn't like it as a campaign staffer when people questioned his age, but on the other hand, legitimate. And in 2020, I didn't work for him, but when he had a heart attack, heart problem, of course, you're going to bring that up. You gotta, it's part of the job as a journalist. So, but what struck me was, of course, they didn't just conceal this when Biden was facing Trump, and it's wrong even at that point. They concealed it when he was facing Bernie as well.
Right.
Don't you think?
But they didn't, conceal Bernie Sanders' health at all. They really pushed Joe Biden through. You had over 20-something candidates at one point. I remember when they split the debates up into two different parts. 10 one night, 10 another night. I remember that. But they really pushed him through. They knew Joe Biden was not the same as he was like in 2008. They knew that he was experiencing some type of cognitive decline, and they still pushed him through. And you see the mess that we're in now. And some people are still trying to push him through again. They're still saying, oh, we got to vote for him again in 2024. Joe barely knows where he is now. What's going to happen come 2024? It's terrible.
That's my recollection. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. I mean, as I talk about in the piece, the same experts who called me, they called me to talk about Trump being mentally unfit during the big push to have Trump removed under the 25th Amendment. You remember there was kind of a media furor about that. Those people didn't, when I called them back, even to consult off the record, like I tried it all different ways to try to get advice on, what are you seeing in Biden? Does he also have a physical impairment issue? They wouldn't comment for the record, wouldn't talk to me. So this was something that it was very much on the QT during the primary and during the general election.
So did you guys hear what Matt Taibbi just said in reference to Joe Biden's, cognitive skills or whatever you want to call it? They didn't want to comment. That's the quiet way of saying it's not good. Sometimes with the media, we have to pay attention to what they're not saying and not always what they are saying. Because in a way, them not even wanting to comment on it, that's saying the quiet part out loud. If he was in great health, why would they withhold that information? You would only withhold it if the news is not good, if he's not in good health, if he is experiencing cognitive decline. Because why would you want to tell that to everybody? Hello, America. Your president is experiencing cognitive decline, but we don't want any progressives to get any type of headway in this political space. So we're going to keep riding on this Joe train because we don't want anybody to primary challenge him from the left. So you're just going to have to be stuck with him again for another 4 years. That's literally what they're saying without saying it. Reading between the lines.
I understand it a little bit more during the general, but even then, I think it's, for a reporter, it's always bad news when you just consciously avoid a story because it ends up coming back to bite you. It's similar to the way reporters non-reported the sort of Hillary's sparse crowds in 2016. nobody really wanted to talk about it, but it ended up being an issue. Like,
Everybody hear that part? You know who had large turnout at their crowds in 2016? Bernie Sanders did. Hillary Clinton didn't. You didn't hear the media talking about that. Same thing, 2020 with Joe Biden. Joe Biden also did not have large turnout at his events. They didn't want to talk about that. Bernie Sanders came here to Boston at Boston Common. It was over 10,000 people there. 10,000 people were not showing up for Joe Biden. Hell, I don't even know if 1,000 people were showing up for Joe Biden. I'm just going to be real here. I don't even know if it was that many, because all the speaking events that I saw, and these were just the ones that I saw, I didn't see that many people in that room. So what does that tell you? They knew from the very beginning, oh, people really may not be feeling him. How can we make it work? How can we change people's minds? At one point, they started to lean towards Kamala Harris. Then they realized she wasn't even liked in her own state. Then they started leaning towards Pete Buttigieg, and they said he could be the one. He's the chosen one now. He checks off all the boxes. Let's go ahead and push him. Then they realized that Pete wasn't too popular with Black people. And Democrats can't win without the Black vote. So then they had to circle back to Joe Biden. That's what happened. And they called in all the stops. Everybody, we got to make this work somehow. Clyburn, say something. Obama, pick up the phone. Get some of them to drop out. That's how it worked. It's a damn shame. You should never have to do that much work for someone to win. That's how terrible of a candidate Joe Biden was.
and a signal that there was, real trouble ahead.
Yeah, Matt Taibbi, you got a little ahead of your interviewer there. I was going to bring up those psychiatrists. I found it fascinating because I had a little bit of problem. I mean, I'm not a doctor or psychiatrist. I'm not really super familiar with the professional ethics, but I read them when people started diagnosing Trump at a distance. I remember when people were diagnosing Nixon at a distance, and it seemed to me to be a violation of professional ethics. But a lot of people.
Wait, Nixon? How old is RJ? RJ doesn't look that old, but he said he remembers when this was happening to Nixon. So, I'm gonna have to look that up.
Were eager to do it. Mary Trump, his niece, who was in that field. I think she's a psychologist, if I recall correctly. She was eager to do it, where she not only, she had a personal relationship, so it's a kind of double violation of ethics, but a lot of people were eager to do it. It struck me that if it was legitimate for Trump, it was, if anything, much more so legitimate looking at Biden just from a distance, as we all are, reminded me of the old Henny Youngman joke. Henny Youngman, there are no new Henny Youngman jokes, I acknowledge that, but
that's a good point.
Henny Youngman had a joke about going to the racetrack where he said, some people bet their horse to win, some people bet their horse to show. I should have bet that horse to live. And I hate to say it, but, wanting Biden to beat Trump, that's kind of how I felt about him at certain points during the.
You said RJ's got to be in his 70s? Really? Wow. Okay, I didn't realize.
I should be betting him to live, but I was very worried about his health, physical and mental, during that race. He seems to be holding up okay, and I'm happy for that. I will, on a personal level, I wish him the best. But it certainly seems to me, if you're a psychiatrist like the ones you've contacted and demurred from even saying anything in private, I don't get where their ethics are, because if you're willing to pronounce on the mental health of Donald Trump, who seems, if anything, more able to construct a coherent, if horrific, sentence, why can't you at least off the record say what offer an interpretation? The only thing I can take away from that is
because they don't have any ethics, RJ. That's the thing. They don't really have ethics. They're supposed to. It's supposed to be ethical journalism, but that's my take on that. But he brings up a good point. If you're willing to do it with Trump, you should be willing to do it with Joe Biden as well, ethically speaking. But we have biased news.
that as a psychiatrist, you're a Biden supporter and you have genuine concerns. But I don't know. How do you read that? It seems unethical.
Yeah, that was one of the first moments for me where I realized that the media environment had changed to a point where I was going to have a problem going forward because, just the way we report the news now is just different. And it's even reached sources who are thinking about the political impact of what they say over just giving you the information, even off the record, which is just so different from the way I'm used to operating. And reporters are going along with it too. It's what's so interesting about this recent flood of stories in the Times also is, again, what are they really telling you by the sudden appearance of all these stories about Biden's health? Well, they're telling you that there's been a big shift somewhere in the Democratic Party, that people are thinking differently in terms of strategy about 2024. We don't think he can do it. We're going to maybe have somebody like Gavin Newsom or J.B. Pritzker step in. Like, they actually explicitly talked about that in the Washington Post.
Listen to what he says here. This is important. Again, he's saying you have to ask yourself, what exactly are they really telling you? What are they really saying? Listen.
I don't know. How do you read that? It seems unethical.
Yeah, that was one of the first moments for me where I realized that the media environment had changed to a point where I was going to have a problem going forward because, just the way we report the news now is just different. And it's even reached sources who are thinking about the political impact of what they say over just giving you the information, even off the record, which is just so different from the way I'm used to operating. And reporters are going along with it too. It's what's so interesting about this recent flood of stories in the Times also is, again, what are they really telling you by the sudden appearance of all these stories about Biden's health? Well,
what are they really telling you? Listen to this.
They're telling you that there's been a big shift somewhere in the Democratic Party, that people are thinking differently in terms of strategy about 2024. We don't think he can do it. We're going to maybe have somebody like Gavin Newsom or J.B. Pritzker step in. Like, they actually explicitly talked about that in the Washington Post. So they're clearly having those conversations with the reporters, but the reporters aren't reporting that.
Did you hear that? They're having those conversations with the reporters, but the reporters aren't reporting it. They're working together here. I mean, is that ethical journalism? No, it's not. They're giving you information, but you got to hide the story because they don't want it to affect Joe Biden politically. This is why I tell people half of what I read and half of what I watch in reference to mainstream media, half of it most of the time is false. Half of the time, you're not getting the full story. You're just getting the story that they want you to hear. What about the stories that you don't get to hear about? What about the stories they're not telling you? Who's reporting on those stories? That's when people turn to, a lot of times, independent media. This is the problem. You got to call it out.
They're doing is they're reporting the phony narrative, suddenly we're gonna decide now that it's okay to talk about Biden's health, and that's essentially what those news stories, what their function was publicly.
And now it's okay to talk about Joe Biden's health because, like he told you, they've already decided there's this shift in the Democratic Party that, hey, we might need to put someone in Joe's spot. So now it's okay to talk about Joe Biden's health. It wasn't okay to talk about it when we saw these signs from Joe Biden during the 2020 primary, though.
Which is very Soviet, right? It's like you're allowed to talk about this now, right? And they've done this with a number of different issues. Some of them on like more the social justice track recently, where they did a gigantic deep dive into the trans healthcare for kids, where they expounded on issues that had been completely taboo in their pages for a long time. So that's really what they're telling you. They're telling you more when it's okay to talk about something, as opposed to what the actual information is, which is just a very strange way to think about the news.
So that's what's happening. Mainstream media, this is what they're doing. It's frustrating. It's so frustrating. There are so many stories out there that just don't get to see the light of day because somebody above at the top has decided it's not okay to talk about that issue right now. This is why I tell people sometimes when it comes to mainstream media, by the time the news gets to us with some issues, some stories, the story had already been 6 months, 1 year old. There had already been stories about the issue, but it wasn't okay to talk about it back then. It wasn't approved, not that subject matter. So what are we really getting? It's really frustrating. It's really frustrating that people can just sit back and decide what you can talk about and what you can't talk about, because now's not the right time. I'll give you an example with policing as well. I think, Matt, I'm going to end this right here because that's the part when he's saying, one more part. With policing, I've heard a lot of people in media criticizing defund the police. That was a stupid idea. Who came up with that strategy? That's ruined the Democratic Party. Rah. But after the school shooting at Uvalde, Texas, at Robb Elementary School, all of a sudden, some of those same commentators are now saying, oh, well, maybe we should defund the police because they had all of these resources. They had a lot of officers present. That story is changing every day, by the way. They have a lot of officers present. Not only that, they also had shields. I showed you guys this. They had shields that could protect them as well. Maybe we should, because they're not actually doing their job. And they allowed those children to be killed. Now, all of a sudden, it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to talk about it in a positive way because someone already said, green light, give the go signal. Now it's okay. You see how it works? I'll let him finish up here.
You and I both grew up in a completely different environment, right? So yeah. It's very odd.
It really is. And I guess, in trying to parse and in reading your piece, at first with this Biden coverage, my initial reaction was, well, maybe there's just blood in the water, right? His poll numbers are so bad. And, majority of Democrats want him out, that maybe they just smell blood in the water. So now it's time to do the get rid of Joe stories that they couldn't do before. But you convinced me, first of all, with these anonymous sources talking about J.B. Pritzker, God, who, they're throwing that guy out. It blows my mind. But him and Newsom and all that, just kind of trial balloon names being put out there. Michelle Goldberg's Joe Biden is too old to be president. And it does have the feeling of a coordinated campaign. Then you pivot to, and I did want to talk about this, you say, I love this line, this sentence, is half a sentence actually. What we've got is a newspaper that catches real history spasmodically and often years late, but has the accuracy of an atomic clock when it comes to recording the shifting attitudes of elite opinion. Yeah, that's very true. Public often learns about key facts, pressing international controversies, or trends in American thoughts only once these are deemed suitable for public consumption. Hunter
That's
Biden. Right. Yeah, I mean, you have to almost read backwards from the stories they print to learn that it's finally been acknowledged 2 years later that really was Hunter Biden's laptop.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and come out there, but you can watch the full interview on RJ Escal 0 Hour. You can watch the full interview there. But yeah, basically they decide whether or not it's okay to talk about something. And if it's okay to talk about that issue, then you can talk about it. How is that any type of different from censorship? How is that different? They decide, is it okay for the public to hear about this yet? Okay, it's okay for the public to hear about it now. Let's go ahead and talk about it. That's terrible. This is why I tell people you have to do your own research. This is exactly why. Gonna go to some of the comments here. Johnny said, that's why I watch it, because it's what they are conditioning the general population to believe. You have to know what they're saying to people. That's a good point. Deborah said, I wonder who Obama will run interference for in 2024. Oh boy, that should be interesting. Black Queer Socialista, aren't they gonna run Gavin this time? That's what it looks like. Joe OWS, Hate Inc. is an excellent book by Matt Taibbi. Check it out if you get a chance sometime. And Joy says, Biden was pushed on us, and then for a cherry on top, they gifted us Kamala Harris. LOL. I hear you there, Joy. I hear you with that one.